Hi there, and welcome to Entrepreneurship 101. This is episode 12, and today we're going to be talking about why startups fail. There are 9 reasons. There's 9 reasons in particular, and I'm going to go over them in minor detail. As you will see, many of these ideas are things I've already discussed and touched upon in previous episodes. The first idea is that oftentimes startups fail because they have a single founder. Now, what's wrong with having a single founder? This is not to say that you can't be successful if a company or startup only has a single founder, but success is made much harder because a single founder doesn't have the advantage of gaining the necessary difference in perspectives and trains of thought that other companies have when they have multiple co-founders. Secondly, running a startup by yourself sometimes is simply just too much. It's too overwhelming. It's a lot to take on, and while a single founder may be able to do this for 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5, 6 months, sometimes even a year, over time, and eventually a startup, that individual oftentimes burns out, and this leads to a bigger failure within the startup and company as a whole. Second issue is a lot of times startups get scared away by competitors. So they'll find a target market that best suits their product or service. But then they'll realize that market is it's what they think is overcrowded, and they realize there's a lot of competitors in that space. As a result, they try to enter what we call niche markets. These are smaller, more unique markets on the side of things, and they enter them because those markets oftentimes aren't crowded with competitors. But these startups are making a key mistake. Just because a space, a market, it does not have competitors in it, does not automatically mean that your product or service fits that market well and that you will be successful. Startups sometimes get too cute in their attempts to avoid competitors, and in the long run, this hurts them. The third idea is pretty straightforward, and that is sometimes startups have a product or service that is based on simply the wrong idea, and it's too similar to the things that are already out there in the market. Startups are unable to differentiate and specify what makes their product or service better than those offered by their competitors. The fourth issue is that many times co-founders have issues with stubbornness. They become too attached, too stubborn in regards to their original idea that in the long run it leads to their startup's downfall. If co-founders are unable to accept the fact that they will have to pivot, change, and transform their idea once, twice, and sometimes many times before they eventually become satisfied with it, then they will not be successful. Oftentimes co-founders running startups become too emotionally attached to their original idea, and therefore do not pivot and change as much as the market is actually telling them to, and this leads to failure. The fifth idea is something I mentioned in previous episodes as well, and that is that sometimes startups do not launch quickly enough. When you launch your product, it forces you to receive real and true feedback. Feedback in the form of actual user commentary. It is once you launch that you receive this user commentary that allows you to actually dive into the commentary, analyze it, and learn from it how you can best pivot and make your product better. If you don't launch quick enough, you are missing the opportunity to receive this type of beneficial feedback, and in the long run, this can actually lead to startup's failure. The sixth idea might seem a little contradictory to the point I just made, but I'll explain why it's just as legitimate as a reason that leads to failure as number 5, and that is sometimes startups do the opposite, and they actually launch their product or service too early. So what would be an example of a time when a startup launches too early? Well, they launch too early when their minimal viable product does not have within it the core values of their UVP or unique value proposition. As we said in previous episodes, a startup is ready to launch their product or service into the market once they have a minimal viable product. But their minimal viable product is only ready in and of itself if the unique value proposition is easily recognizable within it. If it is not truly an MVP that is ready to be brought to market. And sometimes startups don't understand this, and they launch too soon, and this leads to failure. The seventh idea is the fact that startups need to understand the customers. Sometimes startups become so overwhelmed and obsessed with the idea of perfecting their service or their product that they don't spend enough time understanding who it is they are trying to sell to and understanding what type of people and what are the narratives of those individuals. This misunderstanding, this lack of communication between the startup, between its brand and the customers and its consumer base can oftentimes lead to failure. The eighth point is that sometimes startups, they do the opposite of what I said they should do in one of the first few episodes, which is bootstrapping, which is not spending a lot of money, and which is conserving their resources, particularly early on in the startup process and journey. Some startups spend too much money, and they need to be cheaper, and they need to be more frugal. This is another way in which they can end up failing. If they spend too much money too soon, in the long run, they'll realize that they haven't efficiently used their resources, and this can come back to bite them, oftentimes leading to their failure. And the last point is that oftentimes startups place profit over the well-being of their users, and this can lead to failure. Now, what does this mean? And this might confuse it. Why? Right? Don't startups want profit? Of course they want profit, right? They need profit in order to survive both in the short and the long term. But if a startup becomes too obsessed with the notion of generating profit that they are overlooking the well-being and the satisfaction of their users and their consumer base, the lack of communication and the lack of trust and satisfaction from the consumers in regard to the use of their product or service will come back to haunt them, and oftentimes actually leads to their failure. It is again, as I mentioned in a previous episode, profit comes. Startups find great success when their product or service is truly improves the lives of their consumers and users. If they overlook the role that their product or service has in the daily lives of their users and consumers because they're focused on profits, they will fail. That is all for this episode. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you back here soon.